Yeah, I experienced it.
Yeah. Okay. Recording has started, so be mindful of what you say. And let's see. Okay. All right. Now, Skype delegate access is set primarily from the PowerShell command prompt, and it has to be done from AAD 100. The reason is that this server is set up as the application server for Skype. So this server is the essentially the one that has the module installed that can enable delegate access. Now, I've created a file that will appear on every single person's desktop, add Skype delegate, so you can open that up. And again, this information is documented in Confluence. But this gives you examples of how to set up delegate access for users. So one of the more important things is that you have to be in the right location first. All right. So that's the right location. And to add a delegate, you basically run this command. Now this is the delegator, the person who you want to assign rights to, and then this is the person that will receive those rights. So you'll notice that in here I have SIP : and then the email address. The reason is that you don't use the the user principal name. What you have to use is you have to use the SIP address of the person. So if you're ever unsure about the SIP address, you can see that in the Exchange control panel, or you can see it in the Skype control panel. So, but just by looking up the user, but everybody gets their SIP address from their user principal name. So if you know the user principal name, you know the SIP address. Now, after you add the delegate, one of the things that you have to do is you have to remove call forwarding. So by default, what happens is that when you add it, like the address is actually a part of call forwarding, as strange as that sounds, and it's a part of enterprise voice, which is a feature that we're not really using because our phone system is not compatible with it. So as the next option, you need to disable forward immediate, simultaneous ring, forward no answer, and group pickup, and then finally disable team call. Doing that will just basically disable those features, and they'll still be enabled for delegate access via the calendar for creating Skype meetings. So if you ever want to remove the delegates, typically I just recommend you run these commands and then run the remove delegate commands. If you don't remove the call forwarding, what will happen is it won't allow you to remove the delegate proper until that's done. You can also afterwards disable delegation for the user by running this command. So, and as you can see, Mukta, I was able to remove myself from being delegated to you by doing this. So finally. So another thing that you need to do is at the end of everything, you need to invoke CS management store replication. That's just a normal Skype command, and what that does is it synchronizes all of the changes to every single Skype server. And then what you can do is you can run the get command to see where the replication status is. And this will show you if any of the servers are out of replication sync. And you'll notice that AAD100 is a Skype server because it's the application server used for running the resource kit tools.
So, Dan, what if it says up to date is false? In that case, what we need to do?
Oh, just wait.
And how long it takes to update? Is it immediately or
Oh,
will it
no,
take
it
some time?
usually takes maybe 2 to 3 minutes at the most.
Okay.
It depends on how many changes need to be synchronized.
Okay.
So next we can go into the script that is running on the Skype server to import users from Active Directory into Skype. Because, if you will, Skype has its own directory service. So, if a user is an AD, that does not mean that they have a Skype username associated where they can log in. That's the purpose of the SIP address. So, and then I have put the logs output. Okay, SFB. Where did I put it? It's on this server. And resource kit. Here, scripts. Okay. Now, I've written a bunch of these, but really, there's only one that's running. And it's this guy. Production user script. Proper. So basically what it does is it looks for enabled accounts in Active Directory in each of our domains, in NOAM, APAC, SCRN, and EMA. Then it creates those as a list, and that's the list variable. Then it gets the file date, and so that these are log files right here, so that we can look and see what happens in the script. And then for each user in each group, it does a CSAD user, which is like a Skype lookup against Active Directory. And then it looks for the user principal name. If the user is enabled, then it does in this way, even though it's pulling only enabled users, this double checks to make sure, I'm sorry, if this is not enabled in Skype, I apologize, it's not equal to true. Then it enables the user in Skype, registers them against the pool, and it does that for, and then for each user that's disabled, if it's enabled equals and true in Skype, it disables them. So it does that for each domain. And then here's where it gets a little bit interesting. What I do next is I look up for ops users that are a member of an AD group, BPO all, and then I compare it against enabled users in Skype for Business, and then where a user is a member of the group, it will assign them to employee ops, and then it will assign their policies based on their group membership. And if they're not in ops, then it assigns them a different policy. So the policies that it assigns are internal IM audio only and internal all access. So this was something that I did a while back. and this assigns their conference policy and their video or conference audio, and what's the other policy? External access. And then finally, I have a script that assigns the line URI. And the line URI is necessary in Skype for Business because without it being set, the users can't access dialin.fadv.com. Dialin.fadv.com is all the information that the user has for their conferencing policies. So without this being set, it doesn't do it. So the next script, line URI set null, is basically what it does is it does a lookup in Skype for Business against any number that starts with 99, and it sorts it descending so that the highest will come to the top. Then it adds a number, and for every user that needs to be added, it adds this template plus the extension number. So that essentially sets the phone number so that in Skype for Business they can access dialin.fadv.com. Now, another thing that we run into is that, users will ask, well, how do I reset my conference information? This all ties into Dialin. Okay. When they bring up this site, they need to sign in. And then this is where they can reset their PIN if they don't know it. And the PIN is what authenticates them over a voice conversation. So there's some complexity when you're authenticating over voice. So, and I'll get into that in just a second. But if, like, say, a user, remember when users were being brought over from, Link to Skype for Business when we were moving away from Avanade? Well, what happened is that because they were moved to a different bridge, if you will, or not bridge, but a different pool, their assigned conference information was associated with the old pool. So what they had to do was they had to go in here and reset their conference information. Once that's done, then any new meetings created will have the new conference information and be associated with the new pool. Occasionally, conference information will get messed up, and this is where the users can fix it themselves. There are some users that say, hey, by default, Skype creates, unique meeting IDs every time I create a meeting. I don't want that. Well, what they can do is when they're creating a new meeting, they can go into meeting options and they can use their dedicated meeting space. And where do they find their dedicated meeting space? Right here. This is their assigned static conference information. Once that's done, and you can choose Remember My Settings. Now I can close this. And it'll take a second to load. You'll notice that the conference ID, 418-1272. And if we look here, 418-1272. That's my default meeting. And then that's my default meeting URL, which I can send out to users and say, hey, you want my default meeting? This is the link right here. And when they remember my settings, that link will remain on all their meetings. Now, this is not something that we should necessarily recommend that people do because it is less secure. But if you get, I don't know, an executive that, wants this, this is how you do it. Again, so I'm going to set it back. But the meeting options is where you can also set how you want your meeting to look. These people, don't have to wait in the lobby. What you can do is you can set up a lobby to sort of put people in hold until the meeting organizer enters. So if you want only or people I invite, so if anybody is anonymous, they have to wait until the meeting is started. Or anyone from your organization. Again, that has to deal with anonymous. So, and then you can also restrict who is a presenter. So if you hit this, only me, the meeting organizer, then you can't make other people presenters. If you choose people I choose, that allows you to do it. Anyone from my organization, so hopefully that's, and then you can disable features in your meeting by using this disable IM, mute all attendees, block video. And you also have the option of remember my settings. Now, when I change that option back, you notice my conference ID changed. And so did my link, my Skype link. So it's pretty immediate when you do that. Let me make sure. Okay. So, but this website is important. Now, you'll notice that in conference controls, these are controls from the phone that users can use, but only authenticated users can use this. So this is important. If you dial into a phone and you authenticate via your PIN, which is set right here, what will happen is that it will actually, when you're dialing in over the phone, you're authenticating with your PIN, it will actually show your username and the phone number through which you dialed, and you will have access to these functions. If you log in anonymously and you do not enter your PIN, you will not have access to these functions. So conference calls which are telephone only, if nobody dials in and authenticates, there are two things that will happen. Number one, the meeting will not start. The reason being is that Skype for Business requires at least one user to be authenticated to the meeting in order for the meeting to start. Now, there are two methods for authentication in a Skype for Business meeting. One is over the telephone. That's by putting in your PIN. The other means of authenticating to a Skype meeting is by joining the meeting via your Skype client, because then it uses your Windows authentication to join the meeting. So if you get a user that joins via their Windows client, that automatically authenticates and starts the meeting by the default settings. Or if you have a user that dials in and authenticates via their PIN, that starts the setting by our default settings. That starts the meeting. But if everyone dials in and nobody authenticates, the meeting is just left on hold. Does that make sense? to everyone?
Yes,
Okay.
Dan.
Okay, I hope so. All right, now, um, let's get into a little bit of what features do and do not work. Okay? Now, an easy way for me to think of authentication in Skype for Business is to compare, like, say, a PSTN line and your Skype for Business digital connection over your client. So if you think about PSTN access like telephone, like a dial-up phone number, okay, and then, or actually, I'm sorry, let me put a different analogy in your heads, like analog TV and digital TV, okay? Analog TV, you know, hold on, guys, just a sec. Darn it. Okay. Okay. All right. Sorry, guys. There we go. My battery was dying on my headset, so I had to plug it in. Okay. Where was I? Okay. Yes. If you think about the like dialing in over your telephone, like analog TV, and joining in via your Skype client, like digital TV, the two are not really compatible with one another. In order to watch digital TV on an analog box, you need a converter. And that's what the mediation is about. It's tying those two together in a meeting. So, but what happens is that Skype only allows one authenticated session into the meeting. Okay, so that means that if you dial in over a phone and you punch in your PIN, then you try to join via your Skype client to view somebody's desktop. What will happen is that it won't allow you to view the user's desktop. It won't allow you video, and it basically will kick you off. Why? Because you've already authenticated over the phone. So if you run into users having this problem, you need to tell them that, hey, you need to join via your client first, then dial in over the phone and not authenticate. Don't put in your PIN. That way what will happen is that when they're joining via audio, they'll join via anonymously. They'll have all of their functions on their Skype client and they can just mute their audio. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yes, Dan.
Okay. Now that's a really difficult thing to explain to an end user of why. But the whole premise behind it is of security, and you only want one user to authenticate once into a meeting. Now, just to let you know, with WebEx and with other features out there, the reason that you can dial in over your phone, use a PIN, and connect via a client is that they allow 2 authentication sessions. Skype doesn't do that. because what would stop a person from dialing in over the phone and then giving their link to somebody else to join in over a computer, a completely different location? How would you know which session is the real person? With Skype for Business, that security risk is mitigated. It only allows you to authenticate once. That's the reason why. So explaining that to a user is very difficult, and so we should just tell them to join via their client first. That starts the meeting. Then call in. Do not put in your PIN. Join anonymously. Because Skype allows tons of anonymous users in, but only one authenticated user from one source. All right. So let's see now. Another issue that comes up is sometimes what will happen is that users have a problem with connecting to with their system dropping. Now, there's when I went through Skype training, one of the things I was told is that Skype doesn't cause network issues, but when there are network issues, Skype will help identify them. So not necessarily identify where they are, but identify that they exist. So what you can do is Skype has a nice reporting feature that I'm showing you now. You can all log into this, and you can look at the user registration report, peer-to-peer activity, conference summary reports. And then this basically gives you, how many conferences there were, how many participants, and you can click on these numbers. And, this helps. Some of this is more so for management, but it does, and it can provide good information for us as well. I'm looking for there's a particular report, and once I find it, it'll be helpful. Aha. Okay. SIP. All right. Well, here we go. This gives information about who I contacted and the things that I did in Skype for Business. So a lot of this is just instant messaging, but you'll notice that there was a little bit of a failure here. Well, I can go ahead and click on that and get more information about it. So it gives me the diagnostic ID, and I can click on that. And it tells me leaving the app sharing because reinvite failed. And it reported this 2 times. You can also do call diagnostic summary, and you can see the failure rate. Now, in here, but if management ever asks you for information, a lot of it can be gathered here. Now, there, as you are well aware, there's some information that you will not be able to get out of here, and it may be what you're more so looking for, and that's where the CLS logger comes into play. One of the things that you can do with the CLS logger is you can put specific scenarios in, like if you're wanting to look at meeting connectivity, users joining meetings, or just general problems in Skype for Business. This one collects just about everything, the ACP MCU, and then you can select the servers that you want to watch. And that's all of our Skype environment right there. You can change the level that where you're looking for, just errors. And then you need to specify where it's going to be saved. And specify the log levels. And what we need to do is we need to start the scenario. This is basically turning on advanced logging for what we chose on all of those servers in question. Okay. I'm going to stop the scenario. I'm taking Office web apps off of there. Okay. So now all of the logging is happening. And so basically this is where we want to try and reproduce problems when the logging is in advanced mode. Then what we can do is we can stop the scenario. All right, so we've done that on all the systems. Now the next thing is searching the logs. So we can put in that we want to search the logs in the edge pool, and we want to search the logs on the front end servers. This is where we define it, what we're looking for. And when we hit search logs, what's going to happen is it's going to generate a unique, let me bring it up. Oh, on the D drive. And it just finished. Okay. And it didn't obviously get any errors, so let's change that to all. And need to search for all. Okay. Okay. Let's start the scenario again. All right. Giving it a few seconds. Reproducing on errors. Stopping the scenario. Okay. Then searching the logs that were generated. Should give us something now. Oh. That's the one. Sorry, always on is the big one. One, two, 3, 4, 5. Stop that. Yes. Anyway, once you do it, it'll generate a log file similar to what we're seeing. And what we can do is we can use a file called Snooper to actually look at these logs. So I'll open up a smaller one that I did a little while back. And this looks like a bunch of garbage a little bit. But if we go into the messages, this ties them together a little bit better. And we can look at, some of the diagnostic. If I open up a different one, it'll show some errors. That one will probably have some errors in it. And right now it's just parsing through. There we go. There we go. See, this is where you can go and it'll actually show you that this user was unauthorized to try and do what they were trying to do. This was a server timeout. But what's nice is that this was a forbidden, cannot route this type of SIP request to the federated partners. And this can help give you sort of a view into what's really going on in the background. And a lot of times what you can do is you can find related. And it'll show you what events are actually related between this user and this user. Do you have any questions about that?
Looks like no questions, right? Team,
But
are you there?
yeah, the CLS logger is a great utility for weeding out problems in Skype for Business. So, but usually something has to be going on. Oh. Okay, there, we actually generated some information. So by default, it'll open up in Notepad. Uh, but we can go into the messages, and these were the ones that we ran. And these are just conversations that are going on between different users. They're reaching out, and there's an error. This is somebody trying to reach out to a user when the SIP isn't found. Looks like they're trying to reach out to Employee Advantage. That's not a real Skype user. GHD team. So, but if a user's having a problem, what you can do is you can start a scenario. You can export the logs when he's trying to do it, and then ultimately you can filter by his SIP address, and then from there it'll just give you the information about that individual user, or you can do a couple of different options with the filtering. But Snooper is a great utility for drilling down and figuring out what's really happening in the Skype world. It'll also show you if there are network timeouts or things of that nature. It won't necessarily identify where they're coming from always, but sometimes it can give you a general idea, and then you can start looking. Usually we're going to have more problems with networking than with the Skype for Business server itself, or possibly over telephone conversations. Really, if you understand how the product works, then a lot of times you can answer the questions. Something that you can do on the client side is you hold down the control key, right click on Skype for Business, and then you can look at the configuration information. One thing to look for is MAPI information and EWS information. If EWS status is okay, that's the method that Skype for Business uses to connect to the Exchange calendar. If it doesn't say okay, then that means that Skype for Business is not reaching out and not getting the calendar information. So if somebody says, I created a Skype for Business meeting, but I can't see it in Skype for Business, and you bring up the EWS information and it's not connected, that's the reason why. It'll show you where it's trying to connect to, if it's okay, and a lot of times what you're going to have to tell them is, I'm sorry, you're going to have to restart your computer or try to restart the client. Sometimes what will happen is that, and you've probably already seen this, is the client will prompt for credentials. The reason that it's prompting for credentials is it's trying to connect to your Exchange calendar. So that's normal. Now, currently, Skype for Business is not compatible with modern authentication. Modern authentication uses ADFS to authenticate from Outlook to Office 365. Most of our users have that enabled on their Outlook clients already. Anybody who has Outlook 2016, unless we've expressly disabled it, have it enabled because it's enabled by default. But because Skype for Business is not compatible, it has to fall back to using EWS authentication, which is basically just the username password. So if your Skype client hasn't authenticated to Office 365, via an EWS connection, which is basically, just a username password, it'll prompt you. So if you get anybody who's saying, that, like, sometimes they'll misinterpret the Skype for Business authentication with actually Outlook authentication. So that's just something that you can sort of work with them to clarify. And if it is Skype for Business, say, sorry, you have to do it if you want your meetings to show up in Skype. So that's that option. The to be honest, a lot of what is needed is set up in this client. In the options, if you make yourself familiar with these, some people will say, hey, I don't want Skype to start when Windows starts. Well, then you just uncheck this box. Some people will say, I want to change my picture. Well, go in here, edit or remove your picture. Some people will say, I want my phone number to be changed. Well, here's how you can change your phone number. Some people will, want to modify their audio device or to also ring their speakers, when they receive a Skype for Business call. So it's right there. And then now, the only reason that you would ever see call forwarding in your options is if Enterprise Voice is enabled. Now, as you can tell, Enterprise Voice is enabled on my account. I don't use it. Okay? But when it is enabled, you are able to edit your delegate members. So users can add delegate members if Enterprise Voice is enabled. So this is the way they do it themselves, but to be honest, we want them to put in a ticket so that they're not trying this, and so that they don't see things that they don't necessarily need to see. This is where files will save. This is recording options. Like, if the files that they're generating are too big, change the resolution. And then when I join Skype meetings, you can have it show IM, show the participant list. This is so. Just knowing these options in here, you can tell a lot of people, well, just go and tweak this, and they're like, oh wow. Most people don't know they have a dedicated meeting space. Just go into dialin.fadv.com. It'll show you. Just go into your Outlook. Go into meeting options. Change it to your dedicated space. Oh, wow. A lot of that is in the the documentation that I sent to you. Those options, they're all in there. The Skype control panel is where you can, via more of a website / GUI, where you can change people's not permissions, but the policies that are being applied to them. If they're wanting to connect with people outside of the network, well, you have to change the policy. If they're wanting, like, for example, anonymous users to be allowed into their conferences, well, you have to change the policy from audio only to all access, because audio only does not allow in anonymous connections. And that's why we put in the distinction between those contract users in the script, so that all access going forward would be enabled internally, just internally, for users. And that they would have more functionality in Skype. So I know I went over a lot of stuff here, but are there any questions? Is there anything else that you want to cover?
Hi, Dan.
Hey.
That was very much for now. I'm actually excited to use that logger, CLS logger, if I'm not wrong. So yeah, by the time we will use it, we'll get to know what all we can, the difficulty we will have. So I have a simple question here, and this is from one scenario that came up from GHD. You said you have a script running in which every time checks for the new users and enable them in Skype for Business. So there was a scenario in which a lady had got her name changed after her marriage. So what if in that case where the user is already enabled in Skype, but her name, alias, and email address, everything gets changed after a particular time when she requests?
Catherine Mobley. Yes, to fix that, you do it from the Skype control panel. Basically, what you want to do is just search for the user.
Mm-hmm.
Then go to basically, you can bring it up. Actually, no, I'm sorry.
So that's going to be a manual process, right? Not an automatic.
It will be a manual process. Now, one of the things you can do is just simply remove them from Skype for Business. Okay? And that doesn't do anything to the Active Directory account. That only removes the pointer for the user. Okay? And in Skype for Business. So in the Skype for Business directory. And then you can let the script re-add them if you want to. or you can add them yourself. And to add them yourself, you just basically go to Enable User, and then you can do a search in Active Directory for the user that you want to enable. You have to assign them to a pool, and you always want to use the user's user principal name. That's the way it's done in the script. That sets the user's SIP account. Then, usually PC to PC only is fine. And you can just leave it at that if you want to. You can assign the conferencing policy, the external access, and the mobility if you want to. Feel free. But if you just do this, you add the user and user principal name, you choose Enable, what will happen is that will put them back in the Skype for Business using the right information out of Active Directory. Then, once that's done, you can let the script set up the policies for them if you want to. You can set them yourselves. Now, the way the script works is it looks for users that don't already have a policy assigned. If they have a policy assigned, it skips over it. So, if their policy is null, which it is by default, then it goes in and adds it based on their group membership.
Then will the script will run automatically, or we have to run each time whenever we are changing policy for the user?
It runs every 4 hours by design.
Oh, okay. If we are assigning a policy, or if we are enabling Skype for Business for some new user, so they have to wait for 4 hours to enable access, right? Skype access.
Yeah, a minimum of 4 hours.
Yes.
If you're setting it up about 15 minutes before the script is set to run,
I understand.
then they'll be done pretty fast.
Yes.
But the idea is that most of the time we create the user accounts, before the user is even ready for it. So, and usually maybe even a day or before they're going to really use it. So it's automatically populated in Skype, and they receive their default settings.
Yeah. Okay.
And one of the things that
Dan, I have a doubt. If you want to provide the screen sharing option to the user, what will be the policy we have to enable for the user?
Internal all access, and internal all access is defined by default for users that are not PTO, but not contractor. It was a certain group that was defined by InfoSec. Everyone else gets the internal all access. Now, this is only for new employees.
Okay.
For anybody that was already imported over, they're already enabled in the system. This doesn't apply to them. It only looks for users that aren't in the system and that are enabled in Active Directory. So those two criteria have to be met in order to be added into Skype for Business. Then if they're in the group defined by InfoSec, they get the lowest level of permissions in Skype for Business. If they're not in that, they get the next lowest, which includes screen sharing capabilities, and which also includes the ability for anonymous users to be able to access their conferences.
Okay. If the user coming up with the InfoSec approval to enable screen sharing for them, so that's how to enable it for the existing user.
Well, for the existing user, basically,
Yes.
you just log into the Skype for Business control panel. You search for the user.
Yeah.
And then change their policy. Internal all access.
Okay. There is no separate policy for only screen sharing and what is it? PC to PC. Not voice only. Audio only. Audio and screen sharing. We don't have separate policy.
Well, no. There's audio and all access. Basically, there's only a tiny bit of difference between the two. So,
Okay.
but screen sharing does come, but it only allows them to share while internal only. They can't connect externally still.
Okay.
So if you wanted to do, screen sharing when they're outside of the organization and allow them to log in, that's all access. Now, you'll notice all access anonymous and PSTN dial out pilot. You can ignore those, okay? The three that you're interested in are IM audio only, all access, internal all access, and all access. Okay, that goes the same for the external policy and for the mobility policy.
Okay.
So, but the help desk should be up to speed on that because they're doing this as well. They have access to, change users' policies per, ticket approvals, and so if they're not up to speed, they need to be brought up to speed.
Okay.
Because they have the access to do this as well.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but are there any other questions?
No, Dan.
I tried to, make Skype for Business as automated as possible for us,
Okay.
so that ultimately, with user accounts, we're not going to have to be involved for the most part. The script does most everything for us, and but if there are misspellings or something like that, yes, we might have to go in, delete the account. We can let the script re-enable it, or we can do it ourselves. But the script will run every 4 hours, and it will look for anybody disabled and in Active Directory and remove them from Skype. It'll also look for anybody enabled in Active Directory and add them to Skype if they're not there. And it will sign the policies. It will add a line URI, which is necessary for accessing dialin.fadv.com. And one other thing I wanted to show you, and this is I don't know if this will necessarily how much use it will get. Okay, this is the online scheduler. This is designed for creating a meeting when you don't have access to Outlook. Like, say you're outside of the office, there's an emergency, you need to schedule a meeting. This will do the job for you. You can actually go in here and schedule a meeting. Now, the thing is that this meeting will not show up in Outlook, okay? Because it doesn't have the tie to Exchange in order to do that. But what will happen is that it will give you the information that you need to send out. So this is like a makeshift meeting that has to be done. Delegate access is not an option, and you can have the user sign in here. They can create the meeting, and then using Outlook Web Access, they can send it out to everyone they need to. Then it will show up in their meeting. Okay, this is not a great solution, but it is a solution. Say, for example, people using Linux systems, people using that are connecting from a just say a public system somewhere. they can go to scheduler.
Dan,
.fadv.com.
is this link available from outside?
Yes, it's public.
Okay.
It is documented in the the documentation as well as dial in.
Okay. So you said it will not reflect the meeting in Outlook, so it will not for even the recipients and the scheduler itself, right? So,
It'll show up in the scheduler. There's a unique Skype for Business calendar that it will show up in, but and other meetings will show up as well that have been scheduled through Outlook. But any meetings added through this will not show up in Outlook of the user.
the user, you mean it will be the scheduler or
Yes.
only for scheduler?
The web scheduler, any meetings created through here will not show up in the person's Outlook.
Okay, so
No,
what if
I
you
think
are
Mukta
scheduling
asking for the participants also.
participants? Yes.
Okay, now the participants, you can add participants and it will send it out via email to them. But
Okay.
Will they see?
Will it add it to their calendar?
there's a chance, yes. But if you don't put any attendees in there, then and you just create it, then you have to email it. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. So it's a little iffy. So that's why I just say this is not a great solution, but it's just something that I created because you never know when you're going to get into a bind, and this is a quick way out of a bind. So nobody really has to know it's out there, but it is. Another thing that you can do is meet. Now, there have been improvements in this, just to let you know. Where's my Outlook? Okay. I'm going to copy this hyperlink in here. Okay. Now, you'll notice that this is the link for Mukta's meeting that she sent to us. If I do a question mark equals SL1, I think that's right. Uh-oh. Join via... Oh, wait a minute. I think it's question mark SL1. Nope. There's a way that you can put in, add an additional little bit of, at the end of a link. And I thought it was question mark SL equals 1. Question mark SL. Maybe that's it. Here we go. If you add that on, that will join a Skype meeting via your browser instead of via the client. So this will not automatically, a lot of times, populate in meetings. But it is an option that you can tell users to use if they're having a problem joining a meeting. Then they can download the Skype for Business web app plugin and join the meeting. And then they'll have full functionality through their browser. sometimes that happens. But then they also have the option to join via their Skype for Business client or link client from the same site. But it's $SL equals 1. You just have to add it to the end of any meeting. Are there any other questions?
Not from me. I'm good.
Nataraj?
No, Dan. I'm good.
Okay. Manu?
I'm okay then. Will inform you if no, will call you if I have any doubts while doing it.
Okay.
While troubleshooting, if I have doubt, I'll.
So
Okay.
Dan, if you have any Skype for Business tickets, you can just pass it on to us now. The one that we can start troubleshooting with.
Okay, sure. So, and typically, Skype for Business tickets that involve, diagnosing networking problems should not be open for too long, because the conditions will change, and the longer that you let them go, unfortunately, the harder it is to get that information. So that's just an FYI, and I'm guilty of it. So, but just so that you don't make the same mistakes I'm making.
Sure, Dan.
And so let's see. I mean, really, if you go over a lot of the documents that I sent out originally, it deals a little bit with user creation, the Skype for Business control panel. It deals with the clients, and really, those are the things that you're going to run into. Is that it's going to be more that they don't actually know how to use Skype for Business. Possibly, enabling screen sharing. You want to make sure you get approvals for it first, but then once you have the approval, it's literally just a couple clicks. As far as adding delegates access, that can be the most painful, because you add it and then sometimes it won't add to the client, and you have to tell them to reboot, and then they're like, well, I'll do that later. And then they don't. As far as dedicated meeting space, they already have it. They just need to know how to turn it on. So a lot of the issues that you're going to deal with are easy. The ones that are difficult are going to be, going through the CLS logger and, figuring out where problems exist. Because a lot of times it's not going to be the Skype for Business servers themselves. It's going to be in ports that aren't opened. It's going to be in, connectivity that's breaking somewhere. If it's just in the ports, a lot of times you can find it in the CLS logger, and when you're trying to, attempt those connections, you have to start the right scenario for it, but it'll show up, and it'll show up what's being blocked and from where. Then you can go to networking and say, hey, this is being blocked, and then they can get on the line. You can do it as well, and they'll say, oh yeah, I see that they're trying to connect through this IP address using these ports. And they're like, and then you go to the website and say, well, these ports need to be opened. And then a lot of times they're like, okay. So, but one big thing that I should mention is that Skype for Business client communication to client communication initiates its connection through the server, but then once they start talking, the server drops it so that it's from PC to PC. Now, Skype chat is, of course, open, and it uses a port that's pretty much universal. but Skype audio, video, and desktop sharing use different ports that are not necessarily open from computer to computer. So if those ports are being blocked via a client firewall, via a firewall in place, or somewhere along the lines, then that communication won't work. And a lot of times what's happening is that we've opened up all the ports externally that we're supposed to. So anybody connecting from externally, the ports are already opened so that all features will work. But internally, if a person's talking to an external person, the ports have to be open internally for them to connect to the edge servers. So if those ports aren't open to the edge servers, if it's being blocked at any place along the way, then they won't be able to properly use communications outside of chat with them. Like if they try to do their desktop sharing, it's going to be blocked. If they try to do, voice, it may be blocked. Sometimes voice may be working, but desktop sharing may not be. And that's just because of ports. So, and that's not necessarily ports from the outside coming in, it's from the inside going out. So does that make sense to everyone?
And I think the desktop sharing for outside is blocked for us, right?
Well, with
Actually, I tried to share the screen to one of the Microsoft engineer. It was not working actually.
Right, so that means that you couldn't communicate to the edge server. Does that make sense?
Okay. But audio was working.
Yeah, audio is working, but audio and desktop sharing use different ports.
Yeah, okay.
So the ports for audio were open. The ports for desktop sharing were not.
Okay. Actually, is it allowed for everyone in office, or it is allowing for specific users only?
Users have to be in the right policy in order to do it in the first place. Okay? And if they're not, it won't work. So that's an application layer block. But you yourself are in the right policy to where
no, I'm asking about the port.
Port
is open for all in our organization, or?
Well, for person to person in the Bangalore office, it should work provided that both users are in the right policies. Okay, and the reason is that internally, your user-to-user communication should be open, but it may not work with other offices for a person that's internal to that office because the ports may be blocked going across the router to that other office.
Okay, I understand.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you may see this function doesn't work with this office, but internally to this office it works. It's all an issue of ports.
Yeah, okay. So if the port is blocked from their side also, it will not go, right?
Right, and one of the things I've discovered is that some of our offices are using Windows Firewall. And if they're using Windows Firewall, that'll block the ports right there. Semantic Firewall may also be blocking the ports. And then you have our routers out there. So it becomes a quick entanglement here of, starting from the bottom and working your way up to making sure all those ports are opened. Now, that's a big piece right there. Okay, but there's also another piece on top of that, and that is available bandwidth. If the bandwidth doesn't exist between the offices, it doesn't matter if the ports are opened. Okay? Because what can happen is that Skype for Business will prioritize audio connections above all else. So if there's only enough bandwidth for audio, but if somebody's sharing their desktop and the bandwidth starts going wonky, then it'll cut off the desktop sharing. And the reason it does that is to preserve audio so that the users have a better communication going back and forth. So on top of everything else, even if all the ports are opened, if the bandwidth isn't good, it still won't work. So that's why, that's why it's all important. And but I mean that those are the challenges that we face. So I hope that opens up your eyes a little bit, as to sort of what we're dealing with here. And on top of that, we're also dealing with the integration between Skype for Business and the Cisco phone system. We're using a protocol on the Cisco phone system that is higher utilization of bandwidth, for audio. And the reason that we're doing that is that there's only one compatible codec that we can use between Skype for Business and the Cisco audio, and that's the one of higher bandwidth. If we tried to use anything else, it doesn't work right now. Microsoft hasn't programmed that. There are other phone systems that use better codecs that, I think Poly, I can't remember the name. It starts with Poly, and they have a phone system that is more compatible with Microsoft. But I mean,
Polycom.
Polycom. Thank you. But we're so invested in Cisco, and that's such a base of our infrastructure that this is what we're left with using, because the management isn't going to change out the phone system in all locations to be one that's more compatible with Skype. So, and if we wanted to use enterprise voice, we would have to look into, possibly other solutions like a phone system gateway that translates all 7 layers of the OSI model to Skype. So, and which would not be cheap. So we've got our work cut out for us on this system, but I'm hoping this opens your eyes and gives you a little bit better understanding of, what's going on, what we can do, and, what we've got to do.
That's done.
So, having said all that, are there any more questions?
I think it was good. Maybe the team can come back in case of any questions. But
Yeah, please feel free to reach.
yeah, maybe in the next session, what I was interested is you explaining the architecture, like this server does this one. I know that this is documented in the Confluence, but if you have 10-15 minutes in the next session, let us cover that as well.
Sure, of course.
So I think Mukta can set up one more, which will have the architecture explanation and any more questions if the team has. If they don't, I think we can save some time. Otherwise, we can explain that as well in the next session call.
Of course. Yeah, and if you have individual questions or anything like that, please reach to me, offline, and I'm happy to try and work with you to bring you up to speed on any issue that you want. Okay?
Great. Thank you, Dan. Thank you for your time.
Thank you,
It
Dan.
was great.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, sir.